So I'm, just a little bit about my background, I'm purely a qualitative researcher. I've been doing it for about, I don't even want to go there anymore, but I've been doing it for most of my life. What we've done recently is to see how we can integrate neuroscience itself and the research that we do there with qualitative research to really provide different insights to our clients as well. And so a lot of my conversation is going to be about neuroscience. But I want to say that I am not the expert in this field. I've brought somebody with me. But if you do have questions about it, we'll be happy to take that as we go along as well. Okay. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about the subconscious. Now, all of you, I'm sure, would have gone to a shopping mall at any point in time. And, for those of you who are visiting Singapore, feel free to go to one of the 10 or 15 shopping malls that are along Orchard Road. And you'll notice that, when you actually step into a retail mall, there are so many things that your mind is actually absorbing. All right? You're bombarded with all these messages. And the way that your brain actually has to work, the amount of effort that actually has to take, it mimics almost that of your body after they've actually run the standard chartered marathon. All right? So think about, how your mind is and how taxing it can be to your mind. That one of the first things that we do when we go to a mall is typically to find almost a cafe. You need a coffee to wake yourself up, to perk you up. And that's probably why one of the, the biggest or the highest return on investment for any shopping mall is the cafe itself. So think about the elements of what you're actually bombarded with. Our brain actually processes about 11 million bits per second when we look at everything else. But consciously, we can only handle about 40 bits per second. So what happens to all the other information that we do actually absorb, but we can't process consciously? And so one of the things that we try to do is to understand a little bit about how consumers express themselves. Because they can only really express to you a limited subset of what is actually going on in the mind. And so neuroscience is really about learning about all the other stuff and trying to better understand how their brain works, how their mind and how they feel about a particular item, a stimulus, or an object. So what is neuroscience? Are you all familiar with it already? Great. So, if you looked at the definition of neuroscience, if you Googled it, for example, one of the first things they tell you is the scientific study of nerves. All right? And neuroscience research by that is in relation to anything about collecting that data, whether it's through the face, whether it's your facial coding, for example, your hands, any part of the body. In the Nielsen world, when we talk about neuroscience, we are really talking about research where we capture neurodata at the brain level. Okay. So for that, why you ask, why the brain level? Well, very simple. At the end of the day, the first organ that reacts to any stimulus is at the brain level. After which, you get a reaction to your body. So for example, if you see an object, your brain reacts first, after which you might see, for example, eye movement. So there is still a lapse period between when your brain reacts versus when the rest of your body reacts as well. Right? And so it's really important for us to actually be able to capture the neurodata at the brain wave level itself. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that as well. If we talk about where qualitative comes in, if you think about qualitative, it's really about, trying to understand how consumers feel about a product, a service, an ad, any object in itself. And we try to do that as moderators, to try to elicit the responses beyond the first associations in itself. All right? At the end of the day, we do use different techniques to do so as well. I'm sure all of you will be familiar with these, whether we talk about projective techniques, we talk about enabling exercises, we talk about laddering, we talk about collages or photo sorts. But the issue is that all of this is still heavily reliant on the skills of the moderator to be able to process, to be able to identify what it is that consumers really feel about a particular element. Now, even with the best qualitative researcher, at the end of the day, you're still subject to the fact that your consumers can only express what they're conscious about. So how do we actually get to how consumers feel about a certain element that they might not actually be conscious of? And this is where neuroscience comes in for us. So if we look at the power of science, so I'm going to do a quick exercise that I'm sure all the moderators here would be very familiar with. I'm going to say a word, all right, and I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that word. All right, so similar things, all right? It can be an object, it can be a color, it can be a feeling, whatever you think. You ready? Okay, so if I were to say the word chocolate, strong? What did I ask you here? Sweet? Yeah? Brown? Sorry? And delicious wine, for example. Okay, so if you look at the time from when I actually said the word chocolate to the time where I had the first response, that took you about what? 1 second at least, isn't it? So this is a graphical representation of how our brain actually observes, processes, and expresses that particular stimuli. And you'll see that what we do at NeuroFocus is that we actually measure the reaction to a particular object between the 300 and 500 millisecond. All right. Why do we do this? Simply because this is at the stage in which it is before your brain actually has the time to process and to then create a socially acceptable and filtered response to it. All right. And we do this precognitively simply because we do want to sort of strip away a little bit of the biasness and the divergence that may come forth here. How do we do this? Very quickly, in terms of the methodology, we actually measure and collect data across 32 centers on the brain. All right. We do it 500 times every second. And how we do so is we actually utilize what we call a high-resolution dense array EEG, an electroencephalogram. All right, that's almost like a neurocap. All right, they're collecting the data itself, and we actually couple it with what we would know eye tracking itself, basically so that we can actually know what they're looking to, what they're responding to, whether it's positively or negatively. You might ask, why don't we just do eye tracking? Well, simply for the fact that while you might know where the heat maps itself are, we don't necessarily know whether they're responding it in a positive manner or not. And so what we do is we couple the two methodologies in order to get the answers here. What do we measure? We actually measure 3 elements directly from the brain. We have attention, we have memory activation, and emotional engagement. From there, we derive novelty, comprehension, and action intent. At the end of the day, clients need a more actionable element, and what we do is we provide a neurological effectiveness score for our clients. What we find is that a lot of marketers do focus a lot on attention in particular, right? But what we feel is that while you can actually garner a lot of attention, it doesn't necessarily mean that you might like something, all right? And so it's really important to understand that element. So just give an example. For example, I'm sure there are a lot of married couples out here, or married people here. Think about the last time you had a conversation with your spouse, where they were going on and on about a topic, all right? And you were looking at them, but not necessarily listening, all right? And so what we find, or where we find there is a greater correlation to sales, really is looking at memory activation and emotional engagement. And so those two metrics actually drive your interest to actually purchase a product or subscribe to a service. But at the end of the day, does that mean there's no room for other research? No. Because when we talk about consumers, there will be cultural relevance that comes in. There will be biases that sets in terms of how they express their feelings towards a particular object or particular stimuli. And we have to see how we can actually build that challenge to understand what they absorb and what they feel versus how they express themselves. And this is where we see that there is benefit to putting together the best of both worlds. Neuroscience research allows us to identify what it is that consumers are reacting to, what they're thinking, and we couple that with how they express themselves. And that really gives us the benefit, a more complete picture of the consumer itself. It allows us to predict, or better predict, what they're thinking, and then actually employ the right marketing tools to work here. Okay. So, to make it simple, let me show you a couple of examples instead. And these are some of the case studies that we've actually run, whether it's in the Asia-Pacific region or as well as in the US. I'm going to play this ad, and tell me whether you've seen this before as well, yeah?
Welcome to the Gandor Chicken Inn? Yes. First time with us? Yeah. Would you like to bring newspaper in the morning? Sure. Shoeshine? Okay. Wake up call? 7 a.m. How about our turn down service with a complimentary chocolate on the pillow? Great. Do I like TV? No.
Have you all seen that ad before? Some of you? Okay, all right. I'll play it again later on, yeah? We actually did some research on this, and we ran both traditional research as well as neurofocus tests on this particular ad. And it was very interesting for us because in traditional research, the results were very positive. You know, there was humor in the ad, and the humor was delivered by the chocolate being on the pillow itself, the M&M chocolate guy. And, you know, there was a bit of an element of surprise in that, in the whole storyline. When we tested in a neurofocus test as well, what we found was that results were somewhat similar. You know, results were positive, but we did notice that men actually scored lower compared to the women. They actually scored the ad lower compared to the women. And looking at both the traditional research as well as the NF test, we couldn't quite tell why. So what we did was we ended up doing a follow-up focus groups, just amongst the men, all right? Because we really wanted to understand what it was that was actually causing the dip in the score in itself. We took the results, the NF results itself, we briefed the moderator. So the moderator was able to see, based on the results, they can actually see a second by second score. So you could tell where there were dips in terms of the ad itself and where they perhaps lost their interest or they lost the emotional engagement of the consumer, of the males in particular. So the moderator was briefed well in that sense. They tailored the discussion to target those specific elements or those specific instances in the ad in itself. All right? And this was the interesting thing one. So I'm going to show you at which point it actually dipped.
Welcome to the Gamble checking in? Yes. First time with us? Yeah. Would you like a free newspaper in the morning? Sure. Shoshine? Okay. Wake up call? 7 a.m. How about our turn down service with a complimentary chocolate on your pillow? Great.
This is exactly the point where it started dipping amongst the men. Anybody want to guess why? So what we did was that after the right probing in the groups itself, we found out that it wasn't actually that the men didn't like the ad. It was that they didn't want to recognize that there was a chocolate man sleeping in the same bed as them. And that was one of the reasons why they actually dipped in itself. All right? And this was really a classic example of how qualitative and neurofocus really can put together the right story and bring that to our clients as well. Okay. So I'm going to another example, and this was another ad that we tested in Japan for a toothpaste ad commercial actually. And so this was quite interesting. It was actually an ad where the company itself did an internal test, all right? And what they found was that results, they thought that the ad was actually rather robotic. And so we wanted to test it in the neurofocus setting to see, you know, perhaps what we could do to identify what was the issue. And by the way, what you see here is actually what actually clients do get. It's like a dashboard, all right? You'll see that the ad will be playing. You'll see the scores on the top. And that you'll see that the metrics that we actually measure directly from the brain are the ones that we showcase. So attention, emotion, memory, you get the overall effectiveness score. You will be able to see, by the way, as we go along, the actual overall effectiveness score as the ad is playing, and you can see that separately for each of the three metrics as well. Okay?
弱ってきた歯茎には直接届く歯磨きを新しくなった
You see the red line wave.
直接歯茎に直接届く歯槽膿漏対策新高密着処方のデントヘルス歯ブラシも
Okay, so just a quick background. Usually when we talk about the scores, it's based on a 0 to 10 scale. So you can see that the scores were rather average here. All right, so we tried to understand a little bit about why that was so. One of the things that we highlighted, that we found, is this section.
弱ってきた歯茎には直接届く歯磨きを新しくなったデントヘルス直接歯茎に直接
Okay, you'll see that at around 7 seconds or so of the ad is where it started to dip a lot higher. And you'll see that, for example, look at it. Attention is high. It's actually going up. I'm going to go here. Emotion is coming down, and so is memory. All right? And one of the things that we noted was that through other neurological tests and studies that they have done with the team itself, this whole action to our brains is actually danger. It actually signifies danger, and it's neurologically threatening. So people were actually reacting to the actual movement, and therefore the scores were actually dipping in itself. The other element that we saw at the end of the ad was that they actually showcased both the visual of the toothpaste and a toothbrush that the same brand actually created. In the focus group settings, what we found out and what they actually expressed was there was a little bit of confusion, remembering that this is a 15-second ad, all right? They saw both the toothpaste and the toothbrush. They couldn't remember whether this was an ad for a toothpaste or a toothbrush. Okay, so my final case study, and this one was not for an ad itself, because we can do it in different ways. This was actually for a website. We had a client who wanted to improve their website for their target users. But they actually wanted to see that there was a improvement in terms of how their users were reacting to the new website comparatively to the old website. So what we did was we ran both NeuroFocus and Qualitative on both the old website as well as the new website to try and see what the scores were. This was an interesting one as well, because qualitatively, they did say that they felt that the new website was actually an improvement comparatively to the old website. But in NeuroFocus tests, the scores were actually very similar. And so we started digging deeper into the neurodata as well as the qualitative findings. We actually ran these groups ourselves, in fact. And so what we identified was that qualitatively, in the focus groups, they were telling us that they liked, appreciated the new minimal look, they had different groupings in itself, the visual background was interesting for them, but the new website actually had them scrolling down a lot more often, comparatively to the old website. And so therefore, the improvements were sort of limited by the other areas of dissatisfaction as well. In the NeuroFocus test, what also resulted was that we identified, you look at the mention of looking to reduce your printing costs, increasing performance with faster and reliable printing. Those messages were pretty much two sides of the same coin. And you'll see that the scores were reflecting each other as well, specifically in that zonal area. Okay. So just to sort of end off a little bit, I'm just going to share with you a little bit of the few neuro learnings that the science team has actually put together based on a lot of the studies that they've done in the past. A couple things what we learned. Obviously, it's important to appeal to all the senses. A lot of the current marketing that is geared towards the consumers are usually focused on audio, on visual. But we all have 5 senses, all right? And that's an element to really improve on and to apply. For instance, Starbucks, they always make use of the sense of smell at any of their stores. Even a blind man can actually, know that he's passing by a Starbucks stall just by the sense of smell, all right? And if you all get to go to Iron Orchard, have you all been to Iron Orchard before? Yeah? Have you all noticed that there's a scent when you walk in that store? And when you walk in that mall? They're making use of your third sense. The other element, throwing a curve. Think back to our forefathers, where we all came from. And scientifically, we all came from cavemen. All right? We were all cavemen at one point in time where they were fighting with sticks and sharp objects. All right? And that has trained or has already programmed in our brain that you need to avoid sharp angles. So we do try to encourage, to provide environments without angles or any sharp curves. And a great example of this is your iPhone. Right? If you look at your iPhone right now, you'll see that on the product, there are no straight angles. They're all curves. All right? In fact, what we've learned in our own research is that the iPhone is really one of the most neurologically compliant products that's out there. Keeping it simple, and that's also to your retail outlet, yeah? The fact that, for example, again, I'll bring up the Apple Store. If you go to some of the stores that they have, for example, the Covent Garden one in the UK, you'll see that they only put 3 products on an 8x8 shelf, all right? Because they want to keep it simple. They want to keep it uncluttered. Because that's how our brain, you can actually train your brain to actually look at that a lot quicker than if you actually put a lot of things out in the market. And finally, we do engage faster with faces. So if you think of it as a baby, the first time they see their mom and dad, there's a connection. And we ourselves all connect with faces, with eyes, with smiles, and everything. It's always important to be able to showcase the face as much as we can in our communications as well. Putting somebody on a profile, like a side profile, or showing the face without eyes, without mouths, as some ads do, people tell us it's art. But at the end of the day, to our brains, it's also very confusing.
Hi, thanks for the very interesting talk. We got to talk about it a bit before.
Yes.
Every time I see a presentation like yours, the stimuli is always visual. As you know, we're in the flavor industry or the food industry.
Yes.
So I wanted you to share, if you have any case study, how well does this type of methodology works with food stimuli?
Sure. We've actually done this for both a taste test in itself. And I'm going to, at this point in time, I'm also going to introduce to you my colleague Ming Li. All right, she's from the neurofocus side of the Nielsen team as well. But to your question as well, is that yes, we have actually done what we call a total consumer experience, where it is imperative, and this is typically for food or for items that you do have to taste, for instance. And we've been able to actually measure that, even from, and tell me a little bit more about it. Total consumer experience includes not just the taste itself, but the overall surroundings of it. From the minute you open, for example, a packet of chips, to the sound it makes, to the time when you actually crunch it. So neurologically, you can actually produce a test that actually allows you to engage it, to understand how they're reacting to it and what they are reacting to it. So it's actually beyond the taste in itself already. Yeah.
So just to add to that, we did a test for a snack brand, and we actually gave the pack to respondents. We'll tell them what to do, like 4 steps. Right? So everybody does the exact four steps. You open the pack, you look inside, you take out the snack inside, and you eat it. And what happens? And as they are doing it, we are testing and seeing what the neurological responses are. And through that test, we found that what was the key trigger to this particular snack is when they take out the snack and that first crunch. That was the trigger where everyone had a spike. Right? And with that, what they did was the agency took that, made it into a creative, and it became an award-winning ad. Just by that one crunch, that was the big trigger.
You oppose neuronal things and focus groups and dialogue and speech and all that. And really, when you do a real quality work, you work on words. You know, words are linked with subconscious, are linked with unconscious. And somewhere I am a little shocked by the fact that you say that only neuronal things are linked with unconscious. I think all our quality work for so many years is linked with the understanding of the fact that language is so rich.
Yes.
If you just don't say verbatim and all that, but if you do analysis. And really I want to speak about that.
Fair enough. One of the things that we haven't talked about is the fact that we do utilize what we call a test called a deep subconscious response, all right, or an ERP. Actually, these days that when we talk about it, where we look at how consumers react to a certain word in itself. We usually use that in the cases where, for example, where a brand obviously has certain values, all right. And say, for example, a brand had a value that he has to be popular, it has to be innovative, it has to be unique, right? We take those words actually, and we actually check, and we actually measure the neurological response to that word itself. And we can also able to see how they're reacting to it. Now, having said that, what we've learned and what we've done in the past is that when we see that for some reason a particular word is more associated, for example, with a brand, we actually do try to understand why that is. And that's really where the qualitative comes in as well. We've actually started asking them, what is it about that particular brand that makes you think about so-and-so? To try and see how they express themselves and how they actually talk about it. There's not to say that we don't use the words. There's not to say that we don't look at how they express it. You have to look at the combination of it. The nice thing about it, which I found in my experience, because I'm a quality as well, we talk about expression a lot, is that it helps us identify moments in which I should be probing a lot more on, and I should be trying to understand why is it that they're reacting the way they're reacting. And that's where we try to utilize the neurofocus results with the qualitative. So we do see that there's room for both. Remembering that this research, neurofocus is not meant to be, or neuroscience isn't meant to be a better than. It's really a different type of approach, or is an also. And that's where we see combining or integrating those findings are really where we see the greatest benefit as well.
One of the things that's sort of the missing link, if you like, in neuroscience and market research is actually knowing beyond sort of reaction, but actually how does all this sort of fuzzy stuff that's happening in your brain relate to action? Are you doing anything that would say, I feel this way and then as a result later on I do something And I think that's kind of a missing link in having real value beyond sort of ad testing to actually saying, can we do better with or understand behavior?
So we have I can't tell the client obviously, but we had a client that had done, 20, 25 over NF tests or on the different communications that he had over a period of, 2 years or so, for example. And what they did was they took that data and they looked at what the results were in terms of the intent. They measured against the actual sales, yeah, and they saw that there was a direct correlation to if the NF showed that there was going to be a higher intent to purchase, they actually saw higher sales during that period. So this validation was actually done by a separate company, not by the NeuroFocus team itself. And that helped us to really verify ourselves as well that the test was really working. And we really appreciated that as well. And we've been talking about that quite a bit.
Yeah. So Marilyne was talking about the 3 measures that we have just
Yep.
now: attention, engagement, and memory. And with high memory activation and high engagement, you get the action intent. Not necessarily purchase, it could be behavioral thing.
Yep.
Right? Whether they would think about going to the bank or going to the website. That's also a factor in it. So when you look at the neurological scores, where you have high engagement, which really is more about sitting forward, right? Or whether they want to avoid. If they're going to sit forward, they're going to remember it, that's going to be lodged in their brain. The next time they go to the stores, that's what they're going to do. So from the scores itself, you can actually see whether that is going to change your behavior at all or not. Or they totally dislike it. It's not going to work.